Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. No, why does my body have to become a woman's body, doctor? Please tell me this isn't true. The words ripped from my throat, raw and hoarse with a terror I had never known. I shot up from the plush leather chair in her office, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles were white. The room, usually a calm space of beige tones and muted art, suddenly felt like a cage, its walls closing in on me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and panic. It felt like I'd just been sucker punched. The wind knocked out of me, leaving nothing but a hollow, ringing shock. Dr. Emma Lang, my physician for the better part of a decade, didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady, a practiced calm that I usually found reassuring but now found infuriating. Yet behind her professional mask, her eyes held a depth of genuine worry that cut through my anger. "Brandon, I know this is incredibly difficult to accept," she began, her hands folded neatly on the polished surface of her desk. "But the necrotic tissue has spread far more aggressively than we anticipated. The experimental therapy, it failed. Worse, it triggered a cascade failure in your cellular structure. At this stage, the only viable surgical option is a total structural conversion to female-presenting tissue. The female body, for reasons we are still researching, is significantly more compatible with this kind of cellular regeneration. It's the only model that offers a chance of survival." A laugh, sharp and humorless, barked out of me. "A woman? You want to turn me into a woman, doctor? Look at me." I gestured wildly at myself, at the broad shoulders straining the seams of my custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, the solid frame that had carried me through countless board meetings and hostile takeovers. "I'm a man. I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I can't just become a woman because of a surgery." But the bitter laughter died in my throat, choked off by a sudden, searing pain that shot through my torso. It was a vicious, internal twisting, a cruel reminder from my own treacherous body that I was, in fact, dying. The necrotic tissue she spoke of wasn't just a term on a chart. It was a fire eating me alive from the inside out. I gasped, stumbling back into the chair, the strength in my legs deserting me. Dr. Lang was by my side in an instant, her expression a mixture of pity and professional urgency. "Brandon, listen to me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "If we do nothing, you have a few months left. At most. This isn't a choice about your identity. This is a choice about your life." The rest of the consultation was a blur. Words like hormone therapy, grafting, reconstructive surgery, and physiological adaptation swam in a fog of pain and horror. I walked out of her office like a ghost, the sterile quiet of the hospital hallways echoing the screaming void that had opened up inside my mind. Back in my penthouse, the world I had built for myself felt alien. The sprawling apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city, had always been a symbol of my power, my success. Now, it was just an empty cavernous space that magnified my isolation. I stood before the massive mirror in my walk-in closet, a place that housed hundreds of finely tailored suits, each one a piece of armor for the man I was. I saw him there, staring back at me, Brandon Hayes, 6'1", solid muscle, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that had made competitors tremble. Everything about me screamed masculinity, power, control, all of it. Will they just take it all away? The thought sent a tremor through my entire body, a deep primal fear that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with annihilation. Who would I be without this body, this face, this presence? Dr. Lang's final words from the hospital haunted me. "If you don't do this, you'll only have a few months." That evening, the doorbell chimed, a soft, intrusive sound. It was Catherine, my ex-wife. We'd divorced 3 years ago, an amicable split born of two workaholics drifting apart. But we'd remained friends. She stood in the doorway, her usually composed face etched with guilt and sorrow. "Bran," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Emma called me. I'm so sorry. It was me. I was the one who pushed for you to try that experimental therapy. I read the initial reports. It looked so promising. If I hadn't, you wouldn't be in this position now. Silence hung heavy and suffocating in the air between us. I didn't blame her. I had been just as eager for a quick cutting-edge fix. We were both guilty of the same hubris, but knowing that didn't make the reality any easier to swallow. We sat in the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars, and I felt the crushing weight of the decision before me. It wasn't just a choice between life and death. It was a choice between death and the complete erasure of my identity. A choice between living and losing myself. That, more than anything, was what terrified me to my very soul. After Catherine left, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive perfume and unspoken regrets, I found myself in the master bathroom. The room was all marble and chrome, a monument to masculine luxury. I turned on the shower, cranking the heat until steam billowed around me, fogging the mirrors and clinging to my skin. I stripped off my clothes and stepped into the scalding spray, hoping it could somehow wash away the day, wash away the diagnosis. Am I really going to become a woman? The thought came unbidden, a whisper in the hiss of the water. It was horrifying, repulsive, but underneath the horror, there was something else, a strange, unwelcome flicker of something I couldn't name. It wasn't desire, it was never desire. It was more like a morbid, detached curiosity, a feeling born of being pushed to the absolute edge of existence, where all the old rules no longer applied. What would that body, a woman's body, look like? What would it feel like? I shook my head violently, as if to physically dislodge the thought. Water droplets flew from my hair. This was insane. I was Brandon Hayes. I was a man. End of story. But the question lingered, a poisonous seed planted in the fertile ground of my desperation. The next morning I drove back to the hospital. The city seemed grayer, the sounds of traffic more muted, as if the world was already fading around me. I walked into Dr. Lang's office feeling like a man on his way to his own execution. She looked up, her expression softening when she saw me. She didn't offer empty pleasantries. She just waited. She came around the desk and stood before me, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. The gesture was surprisingly warm, grounding. "Brandon," she said, her voice filled with an earnestness that went beyond professional duty. "I don't want to lose you. Not as a patient, not as a friend. Whatever you decide, I'll be with you through all of it. You won't be alone." I looked into her eyes and saw something more than a doctor's concern. I saw a genuine human connection, a lifeline in the storm that was engulfing me. That small human moment was what broke me. A long, ragged breath escaped my lungs, a sound of complete and utter surrender. "I'll sign," I rasped, my voice cracking. "Do it. Just do it." Oh, she slid the consent forms across the desk. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt immense, impossibly heavy. The moment the ink touched the paper, scrawling my name, my old name on the dotted line, I knew my life as I knew it was over. A door had slammed shut behind me, and the path ahead was a dark, terrifying, and completely unknown country. I woke to a world of white, a blinding, clinical whiteness that seemed to absorb all sound, all sensation. The first thing I registered was the smell, that unmistakable hospital scent of antiseptic and sterile linens. The second was a feeling of profound disconnection, as if my mind was floating a few inches above a body that didn't quite belong to me. It felt heavy and light at the same time, a paradox of aches and numbness. "Brandon, can you hear me?" The voice was Dr. Lang's, warm and close, cutting through the sterile haze. I tried to answer, to form a word, but the sound that emerged from my lips was a shock. It was soft, breathy. It was higher in pitch, a full octave above the deep baritone I was used to. It wasn't a man's voice. My eyes flew open. Emma was sitting beside the bed, a gentle smile on her face. The room was a private recovery suite, flooded with the soft light of a new morning, but nothing felt new in a good way. It all felt wrong. As the last remnants of anesthesia faded, awareness returned in a brutal, overwhelming rush. I tried to shift, to sit up, and that's when the second wave of shock hit me. My body felt different, smaller. My 6'1" frame, which had always felt powerful and substantial, now felt slighter, more delicate under the thin hospital blanket. I slowly, hesitantly, lifted a hand into my line of sight. It was not my hand. My hands had been large, with calloused palms and blunt, capable fingers. This hand was smaller, the fingers long and slender, the nails neatly shaped, the skin smooth and soft. I stared at it, turning it over and over, a foreign object attached to my own arm. Is this really my body?" I asked, and again. That softer, higher voice sent a jolt of panic through me. Emma reached out and took my new, strange hand in hers. Her touch was warm and reassuring. "You're safe, Brandon, and yes, everything is matched. The surgery was a complete success." Success, the word was a slap in the face. I wanted to scream, to protest, to rage against this monstrous success that had stolen my body from me. But when I brought my other hand up to my face, this slender, delicate hand, and felt the softer contours of my jaw, the smoother skin of my cheek, the words caught in my throat. I was trapped. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. This is me. Later that day, Emma helped me sit up. A nurse came in with a fresh hospital gown. It was different from the one I had on. It was a pale blue color, made of a thinner, softer cotton. A woman's gown. "Let's get you into something more comfortable," Emma said gently. Even with my chest heavily bandaged, it was impossible to ignore the distinct, soft mounds that were now there. As Emma helped me slip the new gown on, the fabric slid over my skin, and an involuntary shudder ran through me. The sensation was electric. The thin cotton felt impossibly soft as it draped over my shoulders and settled against the new curves of my body. It wasn't like wearing a shirt. It clung and flowed in a way that made me intensely aware of every inch of myself. My old body, my male body, had been like a sturdy fortress, its skin a tough barrier against the world. This new skin was sensitive. The slightest touch of the fabric against my side, the brush of it against my newly shaped hips, sent a cascade of unfamiliar sensations rippling through me. It was so intense, so immediate, that a hot blush crept up my neck and into my cheeks. "It's okay," Emma said. Noticing my reaction, she smiled a small, understanding smile. The hormone therapy significantly increases nerve and skin sensitivity. It's a normal part of the process. I couldn't meet her eyes. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt since I was a small child. I didn't think it would be so noticeable, I mumbled, pulling the gown tighter around me as if it could somehow shield me from my own body. The next day marked the trial I had been dreading most of all. Emma said it was time. She wheeled a full-length mirror into my room, positioning it at the foot of my bed. My heart pounded in my chest. I had been avoiding my reflection, catching only fragmented glimpses in the polished chrome of the bed rails or the dark screen of the television. Now there was nowhere to hide. With Emma's help, I stood on shaky legs and faced the mirror. And the man I knew was gone. A stranger stared back at me. A woman. She was tall for a woman, but her frame was slender, with softly curving hips and a waist that tapered inward. Her shoulders were narrower, her neck more graceful, her face, it was my face. But not all. The underlying bone structure was familiar, but everything had been softened, refined. My jaw was less angular, my cheeks fuller, my lips softer. My eyes, which had always been my most commanding feature, now seemed larger, deeper, framed by long dark lashes I didn't recognize. My hair was still short, but it was finer, and fell in a way that framed my new face with an unfamiliar delicacy. Even with the post-surgical swelling and the paleness of recovery, there was no denying it. The woman in the mirror was beautiful. "That's not me," I whispered, the words a faint breath of denial. My voice trembled. On the verge of breaking, it felt like I was looking at a ghost, the ghost of a person I had never been. Emma stood beside me, her reflection next to this new woman's. She placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Brenda," she said softly. The name hung in the air. "That's the name we registered on your new confidential medical file," she continued gently. "We thought you might want a new name to go with this new beginning, if you want it." "Brenda." I closed my eyes. but the image of the woman in the mirror was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Brenda. The name felt like a costume, a role I was being forced to play. It attached itself to me, a label for this stranger I had become, a whisper of a future that felt utterly alien. I opened my eyes again, and she was still there, Brenda, staring back at me from the other side of the glass. The transition wasn't just about having a new body, it was about learning how to live inside it. Every simple movement I had taken for granted my entire life was now a foreign language I had to learn from scratch. Catherine came to visit a few days after the mirror incident. She walked in carrying a bag from a high-end boutique and gave me a smile that was both gentle and appraising. "So," she said, her tone light, trying to inject some normalcy into the twilight zone my life had become. "Emma told me you were starting physical therapy, thought I might be able to help you, or rather, her, with some of the basics." A flush of irritation and embarrassment warmed my cheeks. I'm still a man in my head. "Catherine," I snapped, though my new voice robbed the words of their intended harshness, making them sound more like a petulant complaint. "I know, Bran, but your body won't hold up if you keep trying to move like you used to. Trust me." She gestured for me to stand. "Your center of gravity has shifted. It's lower now. You can't just stride forward with your shoulders anymore. It has to come from your hips." And so, my first lesson began in the sterile confines of the hospital room. It was humiliating. Catherine showed me how to stand without looking like a soldier at attention, how to let my hips settle into a more natural, stable stance. Then came walking. Smaller steps, she instructed, don't fight the movement in your hips, just let it flow. I felt ridiculous. Every step was a conscious, calculated effort. I tried to walk in a straight line from my bed to the window, and my movements were stiff, awkward, like a marionette with tangled strings. But then, for a brief moment, I stopped overthinking it. I took a step, and my hip moved with a slight, unconscious sway. The sensation was bizarre. I felt the subtle shift of weight, the gentle roll of my hips that my old body could never have produced. My skin grew warm. It wasn't a feeling of pleasure. Not exactly. It was the strangeness of it, the foreignness of feeling my own body move with an inherent grace that I hadn't commanded. It was unnerving. But as Catherine had predicted, it was also not entirely unpleasant. It felt efficient, natural for this new frame. A young male nurse, probably in his early 20s, walked past my open door on his rounds. He paused for a second, a friendly, open smile on his face. "Looking good. Miss Brenda, you've got a natural grace." I froze mid-step, nearly tripping over my own feet. "Miss Payne's Brenda." He'd called me Miss Mina Brenda. A hot blush flooded my face, more intense than any I had ever experienced before. I started to say, the old reflex kicking in, but the words died on my tongue. I looked down at my body, at the soft curves beneath the hospital gown, at the slender hands clenched at my sides. Who was I trying to convince? The nurse just winked, completely oblivious to my internal crisis. "Just telling the truth," he said cheerfully before continuing down the hall. That was the first time someone saw me, not as Brandon Hayes in a bizarre medical situation, but simply as a woman, and the first time I, or she, Brenda had been flirted with. My heart, my foolish, traitorous heart, was hammering against my ribs, a wild, uncontrolled rhythm that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with a bewildering, terrifying flutter of something. I didn't know what it was, but it scared me more than the surgery itself. Later that evening, alone in the quiet of my room, the city lights beginning to glitter outside my window, I lay in bed and let my hands explore the new landscape of my body. It was an act of detached reconnaissance, an attempt to map this alien territory. My fingers traced the softer line of my jaw, the delicate arch of my collarbone. I ran a hand down my side, over the curve of my waist and the gentle flare of my hip. This body was not something I had chosen. It had been forced upon me by a cruel twist of fate and medical necessity. I should have hated it. I should have been repulsed by it. And a part of me was still grieving for the man in the mirror, for the solid, predictable strength of the body I had lost. But as my hand rested on the gentle swell of my hip, I was forced to admit a terrifying truth to myself. It wasn't as bad as I had imagined. The new sensations, the heightened sensitivity, the strange and disconcerting grace of my movements, they weren't entirely hateful. And that was what scared me the most. This reluctant acceptance, this tiny seed of non-revulsion, felt like a betrayal of the man I had been. It felt like I was losing not just my body, but the very core of my identity. And I was too weak, too exhausted, to even fight back. The conflict raged inside me, a silent war in the still of the night. Who was I becoming? And did I even have a choice? A week later, just as I was starting to get used to the basic mechanics of moving, Emma and Catherine decided it was time for the next stage of my re-education. Emma arrived at my room not with a medical chart, but with 2 large, elegant shopping bags. Catherine was already there, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "We thought it was time for Brenda to try on some real clothes," she announced, her voice full of cheerful finality. My eyes widened in alarm. "No, absolutely not," I said, my voice tight. "I am not wearing dresses and skirts." The very idea felt like a surrender, a final nail in the coffin of Brandon Hayes. Catherine just smiled and pulled a garment from one of the bags. It wasn't a dress. It was a nightgown, a simple slip made of a deep sapphire blue satin. It looked impossibly delicate. "Just try it, Bran," she coaxed. "The hospital gowns are rough. This will be more comfortable against your skin. Think of it as a medical necessity." I wanted to refuse, to throw it back at them. But I was tired of fighting, tired of being angry. With a sigh of resignation, I took the garment. The satin felt cool and impossibly smooth against my fingertips. In the privacy of the bathroom, I pulled off the coarse hospital gown and, with a deep breath, let the satin slip over my head. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. It was nothing like putting on a t-shirt. The material didn't just cover me. It flowed over me. It was cool and slick, gliding across my shoulders, over my bandaged chest, and down my torso like liquid silk. Where the fabric touched my skin, my newly sensitive skin, it felt like a whisper, a caress that sent a shiver racing down my spine. The nightgown draped and clung in ways I was entirely unused to, outlining the shape of my waist, the curve of my hips, in a way that felt both incredibly revealing and strangely elegant. It pulled around my knees, the light weight of it a constant, soft reminder of its presence. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I couldn't meet their eyes. I just stood there, my arms crossed over my chest, feeling more exposed than if I'd been completely naked. Emma's professional demeanor faltered for a second. A faint touch of pink appeared on her cheeks. That color suits you," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. I turned away sharply, staring out the window. It's not me. This is all just temporary, a means to an end. But my heart was doing that stupid, frantic dance again. The feeling of the satin against my skin was so distracting, unpresent. It wasn't sexual. It was purely sensory, but so intense that it felt intimate, personal. The next challenge came in the form of a makeup bag. "All right," Catherine said, rubbing her hands together with far too much enthusiasm. "Phase 2. She sat me down in a chair facing the window and started laying out an arsenal of brushes, powders, and creams. I flinched as she came toward me with a soft bristled brush. "Relax," she murmured. "Just close your eyes." I did as I was told, surrendering once again. The feeling of the brush sweeping powder across my cheek was feather-light, the soft dab of a sponge applying foundation, the delicate tickle of a mascara wand against my eyelashes. Each touch was a new, strange sensation on my hyper-aware face. It felt less like an application of cosmetics and more like a gentle exploration. My body, this new female body, seemed programmed to register these softer, more delicate interactions in a way my old one never could have. It was unnerving how my muscles seemed to relax into it, how a part of me that I didn't recognize found the process calming. When she was finished, she held up a small hand mirror. "Okay, open." I opened my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see a sick patient or a confused man in a woman's body. I saw a stranger, yes, but a complete one. Catherine had used a light hand, but the effect was transformative. The makeup evened out my skin tone, hiding the last of the post-op pallor. It defined my eyes, making them look even larger and deeper, and added a hint of color to my lips and cheeks. The woman in the mirror was young, striking, her expression a little lost, a little vulnerable, but undeniably beautiful. There was no trace of Brandon Hayes left in that reflection, and for the first time, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. I was just disconnected. It was like looking at a painting of someone I might know. A strange, unsettling neutrality settled over me. After Catherine left, promising to return with more essentials, Emma lingered behind, ostensibly to check my vitals. She moved around the room, her presence quiet and calming. "She did a good job," Emma said, nodding toward my reflection in the dark window. "The lipstick, it's a nice shade." "Don't call me her," I mumbled, the protest weak even to my own ears. "But you look like a young woman, maybe 25, 26. She smiled. "It's remarkable." I felt that blush again, a helpless tide of heat rising in my cheeks. Emma stepped closer, her professional gaze softening into something more personal. "Your collar is a little crooked," she said, her voice low. She reached out to adjust the thin satin strap of the nightgown where it had twisted on my shoulder. Her fingers, warm and gentle, brushed against the bare skin of my collarbone. It was an innocent, incidental touch, but it felt like a bolt of lightning. A jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation shot straight through me, making me gasp. The feeling was so intense, so unexpected, that my back arched slightly, an involuntary reaction I had no control over. "Your new body, it has very natural responses," she observed, her eyes meeting mine. There was a spark of something in them, curiosity, maybe something more. I didn't mean to do that," I stammered, feeling mortified and utterly confused by my own body's betrayal. Emma just gave a small, enigmatic smile, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before she pulled her hand away. "It's okay," she said softly. "You look very pretty when you're flustered." She left the room, leaving me standing there, my skin tingling where she had touched me, my heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against my ribs. I was lost, completely and utterly lost. 2 months after the surgery, the day came for me to return to the world, to return to work. The idea was daunting, terrifying even. How could I walk into the headquarters of Hayes Corp., a place I had built from the ground up through sheer force of will and masculine aggression, as this new person? Catherine had acted as my stylist and coach, preparing me for this day like a general planning a military campaign. The outfit she'd chosen was a masterpiece of strategic dressing, a tailored pantsuit in a deep charcoal gray. The jacket was sharply cut at the shoulders but nipped in at the waist, emphasizing my new slenderer torso. The pants were slim-fitting, designed to flow gracefully with each step. Underneath, I wore a simple silk blouse in a soft cream color. It was a uniform of power, but a distinctly feminine one. The feeling of the clothes was a complex symphony of sensations. The crisp wool of the suit felt structured and secure, while the silk blouse was a soft, constant caress against my skin. The fitted nature of the garments meant I was always aware of my body's shape, the gentle curve of my hips against the fabric. The space where a flat chest used to be now occupied by soft, round breasts that pressed lightly against the silk. I had been fitted for a proper bra a week earlier, an experience so mortifyingly intimate that I'd blocked most of it out. But now, the feeling of the straps on my shoulders and the supportive band around my chest was a constant, undeniable reminder of my new anatomy. It felt restrictive, yet it also gave my upper body a shape that made the blouse and jacket hang correctly. It was another layer of artifice, another piece of the Brenda costume. But as I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror of my penthouse that morning, something strange happened. For weeks, I had practiced this. I had practiced walking in low heels, modulating my voice, even shaking hands with a firmness that felt authoritative without being crushingly masculine. I had prepared for battle, but looking at the woman in the mirror poised, elegant, and radiating a quiet intensity, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or resentment. It was a strange, unfamiliar spark of confidence. The reaction at the office was exactly what I'd expected utter. Stupefied shock. Whispers followed me down the hallway like the rustling of leaves. My executive assistant, a man who had worked for me for 10 years and had never shown an ounce of fear, dropped his tablet. The boardroom, when I entered, fell into a stunned silence. All these powerful men, titans of industry I had known for years, stared at me as if I were an alien who had just landed. I walked to the head of the table, my heels making a soft, steady clicking on the marble floor. I put my portfolio down and looked at them all, meeting each of their gazes. My voice, when I spoke, was not the booming command of Brandon Hayes. It was softer, measured, but it carried a clarity that cut through the silence. Good morning, gentlemen. There have obviously been some changes, but the leadership and the vision of this company remain the same. Now, let's get to the quarterly reports. And just like that, I was in charge again. The delivery was different, but the authority was still there. In a way, it was even more potent before. I had ruled by intimidation. Now, I found myself persuading, charming, and leading with a sharp, incisive intelligence that seemed almost more striking coming from this new form. A few days later, a younger executive from the marketing department, a hotshot new hire named Mark who had joined the company during my medical leave, caught up with me by the coffee station. He had no context for who I used to be, to him. I was just the brilliant, beautiful, and slightly intimidating new CEO. Ms. Hayes, he began, a nervous but charming smile on his face. That was an incredible presentation this morning. I was wondering, and please tell me if this is out of line, but I was wondering if you might let me take you out for a coffee sometime too. You know, pick your brain about your strategy. I froze, the ceramic mug halfway to my lips. For a moment, I was speechless. No one, in my entire professional life, had ever dared to flirt with Brandon Hayes. They feared him, they respected him, they envied him, but no one had ever looked at him and thought, I want to ask him out. The dynamic was so completely alien that I didn't know how to react. A part of my old self wanted to fire him on the spot for his audacity, but another, newer part of me felt flattered, intrigued. I gave him a small, polite smile. I appreciate the offer, Mark, but I have a policy against socializing with my employees. Keep up the good work, though. He looked a little disappointed but nodded professionally and walked away. I stood there for a long moment, my coffee forgotten, processing the encounter. The world's reaction to me had fundamentally changed. I was no longer a force to be reckoned with. I was a woman to be approached, admired, even desired, and the most unsettling part was that it didn't feel entirely unwelcome. That night, back in the sterile quiet of my penthouse, I stood before the mirror again, but this time, I wasn't searching for the ghost of Brandon. I was looking at Brenda, really looking at her. I saw the intelligence in her eyes, the resilience in her posture, the quiet strength in her expression. The sense of loss was still there, a dull ache for a life and a body that were gone forever. But it was no longer the all-consuming grief it had been. It was giving way to a new feeling curiosity. Curiosity about this woman, her capabilities, her future. A whisper of a thought, one that had been building for weeks, finally solidified into a conscious realization. Brandon isn't dead, I thought, a sense of calm clarity washing over me. He didn't die on that operating table. He just, transformed. He became her. And as I met the eyes of the woman in the mirror, for the very first time, I smiled. It wasn't Brandon's sharp, predatory grin. It was a softer smile, hesitant, but genuine. It was Brenda's smile. The shift inside me was gradual, but profound. With the acceptance of my new self came a newfound peace, and with that peace, my focus turned outward. The world no longer felt like a hostile stage where I had to perform. It felt like a place where I could simply be, and my relationship with the woman who had guided me through this impossible journey began to change. 2. Emma Dr. Lang had remained a constant presence in my life, overseeing my follow-up care. Our appointments became less about medical checkups and more about checking in. We would talk for hours about my experiences at work, my struggles, my small victories. She was the only person who had seen every stage of my transformation, the only one who knew the man I had been and the woman I was becoming. One sunny afternoon, she suggested we have our weekly meeting not in her sterile office, but in the hospital's rooftop garden. It was a beautiful, tranquil space, filled with blooming flowers and lush greenery, a hidden sanctuary above the bustling city. We sat on a quiet bench, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves around us. For a while, we just sat in comfortable silence, watching the clouds drift by. "You've changed so much." "Brandon," she said softly, then quickly corrected herself. Brenda. It's hard to even picture you as you were before." "Tell me about it," I said with a wry smile. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm still surprised, but the shock is gone. Now it's just me. I turned to look at her, really look at her, not just as my doctor, but as the woman she was. "Emma, thank you for everything, for saving my life. Of course, but also for staying. You didn't have to, but you were there through it all." Her professional composure seemed to melt away under the warmth of the afternoon sun. "It was more than a doctor's duty, Brenda," she admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. "Watching you go through this, seeing your strength, your resilience, you fascinated me from the beginning, both of you, the powerful CEO and the vulnerable woman fighting to find her place." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. You make me want to be here, more than just as your physician." My heart did a familiar little flip, but this time it wasn't accompanied by panic or confusion. It felt right. The air between us grew thick with unspoken words, with months of shared trauma and growing affection. In that moment, surrounded by life and new growth, everything felt possible. Hesitantly, my hand moved on its own accord, my slender fingers reaching across the space between us to cover hers. It was a simple gesture, but it was the first time I had initiated a physical touch with anyone since my transformation. Her skin was warm, and she turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through mine. The fit was perfect. We didn't need to say anything else. It was a new beginning, unfolding naturally, without pressure or expectation. It wasn't the passionate, aggressive way Brandon Hayes would have pursued a woman. This was something different. It was gentle, tentative, and deeply rooted in a shared, extraordinary experience. It was a connection that felt as new and as sensitive as my own skin. Life began to settle into a new, unexpected rhythm. I continued to lead my company with a renewed sense of purpose, but the ruthless ambition that had driven Brandon Hayes had been tempered by something else: empathy. My experience had cracked me open, shown me a vulnerability I never knew existed, and in doing so had connected me to the world in a way my old self never could have. This newfound perspective sparked an idea, one that grew from a tiny seed of thought into a consuming passion. I had the resources, the influence, and a unique, first-hand understanding of what it felt like to have your identity stripped away and rebuilt from the ground up. I started a foundation, the Phoenix Initiative, dedicated to providing financial, medical, and psychological support for transgender and gender nonconforming individuals who lacked the resources I'd been fortunate enough to have. I poured millions of my own money into it, leveraging my corporate connections to build a powerful network of support. My role as CEO of Hayes Corp slowly became secondary. I delegated more, trusted my team, and spent most of my time at the foundation. There, I wasn't a corporate titan or a medical marvel. I was just Brenda, a woman who understood. I remember one afternoon, I was meeting with a young transgender woman named Sarah. She was terrified. She was about to begin her medical transition and was facing rejection from her family and the loss of her job. She sat across from me in my office at the foundation, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with a familiar fear. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this," she whispered, her voice cracking, "to face the world as me." I reached across my desk and took her hand. When I woke up after my surgery, I told her, my voice quiet and steady. I felt like I had lost everything. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, but that stranger wasn't my enemy. She was just new. The journey to get to know her, to accept her, was the hardest thing I've ever done. But she was also the one who saved my life, and she's stronger than the man she used to be ever was. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You are strong enough. and you are not alone. Seeing the hope dawn in her eyes, seeing that small flicker of resolve replace the fear, was more satisfying than closing any billion-dollar deal. I had found a purpose beyond profit margins and stock prices. I was helping people navigate the same terrifying, transformative journey I had survived. My forced rebirth had given me a gift I never would have asked for, but one that had ultimately redefined my entire existence. Brandon had built an empire of things. Brenda was building a legacy of hope. A year later, my life was unrecognizable, and yet for the first time, it felt completely my own. My hair had grown out, falling in soft waves past my shoulders. My wardrobe was now filled with clothes that I chose not for strategy or defense, but for the simple pleasure of how they felt against my skin's soft cashmeres, flowing silks, comfortable linens. The penthouse, once a monument to a man's ego, had been redecorated. The harsh lines and dark colors were replaced with warm tones, comfortable furniture, and vibrant art. It felt less like a showroom and more like a home, our home. One evening, Emma and I were curled up on the sofa, watching the city lights ignite as dusk settled over the skyline. A soft blanket was draped over our laps, and I rested my head on her shoulder, breathing in the faint, familiar scent of her perfume. Her arm was wrapped around me, her fingers gently stroking my hair. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, her voice a comforting rumble against my ear. I smiled, a real easy smile that reached my eyes. "I was thinking about the man who used to live here." I said, "Brandon. He would have hated this." Emma chuckled. "He would have been in his office, yelling at someone on the phone about stock prices." "He would have been so angry." I continued, a sense of wonder in my voice rather than sadness, so terrified of all of this softness, this quiet. He thought strength was about being hard, about never showing weakness. I lifted my head and looked at her, my heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude that was so immense it felt like it might burst. "He was wrong," I whispered. Emma's eyes were full of love. She leaned in and kissed me, a kiss that was gentle and deep, full of shared history and a quiet promise of a future. It wasn't a kiss of fiery passion, but one of profound peace and belonging. When we parted, I laid my head back on her shoulder, my hand finding hers, our fingers interlocking naturally. Outside, the world hummed with life, a symphony of a million different stories, and here, in this room, my own story had finally found its harmony. The journey had started with a terrified scream, a violent rejection of a fate I didn't choose. It was a path forged through fear, humiliation, and a grief so deep I thought it would drown me. But it had led me here, to this moment of peace, to a love I never expected, to a self I never knew I could be. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion as I looked out at the glittering expanse of the city. "Thank you for giving me a chance to live, and for giving me a chance to become me." The ordeal had not been a verdict or a punishment. It had been a rebirth. The end of Brandon Hayes was not a death, but the beginning of Brenda, and for the first time, in the quiet of my own heart, I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't have it any other way.